I talked about our guest, Paul Zielie, industry luminary, consulting solutions architect. You see it right there. Is that SDVoE? That's what I think. We're going to ask the hard-hitting questions first. Paul, come on in here.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Paul? How do I say it? I should have asked this a week ago.
I usually say AVCOIP, but
Okay, there you go.
it's really a placeholder because I couldn't get AV over IP without spending a lot of money for the domain. So
Sure.
audio video control on networks, it's really what you and I have been dealing with for a living
Okay.
for a lot of years. And thinking about it holistically is important. But that being
Well, my in,
said,
my
it's just
inclination is my my inclination is to want to make fun of you for choosing an acronym that's very difficult to pronounce series of letters for the name of your organization, but something tells me I shouldn't do that.
it doesn't really matter. I'm not out there, dealing with the public. From that matter, my primary marketing is walking around trade shows and having people say, "Oh, Paul, we need you for something." Um, so you have to have a name, and I picked it, and I don't really put a lot of stock in
Well,
how people pronounce
as president of the SDVoE Alliance, I think AVCOIP is a great name. Maybe
right.
we should
And
do a
I do
collaboration.
spell it with a small O like you do.
Oh, that's right. See, yeah, I'm telling you, there's a collaboration here, right? It's like
Yeah.
SDVoE by AVCOIP. Drops April
Well,
an NFT. That's what we need.
you
We need an
you you
NFT.
are a V over IP solution, so it
There
would
you
fit
go.
into my
There you
general
go.
purview.
Let's go solve some stuff. Let's talk about some real things, some things that people might be interested to
Okay.
hear instead of you and me blabbing about the name. So asking the right questions, right, at requirements time, at design time. What are the right questions?
So this comes back to something that happened when I was at a previous employer, and I usually try to avoid standing in trade show booths. Um, but I was standing at a trade show booth filling in for somebody, and a very senior marketing person came over to me and said, "Paul, you're spending too much time answering the customer's questions." And I said to him, "No, I'm not. They're asking the wrong questions. All this time is getting them to the right questions so I can give them a correct answer." And it really comes down in a lot of cases to the right answer to almost any specific question initially when you're an engineer or designer is, what are you trying to do? Because people will have a vision of a magic bullet in their mind, and they'll ask about that, and that may or may not be the magic bullet. So in order to correctly serve them in what they're trying to do, it's really important to always come back to that and then start to qualify things. And often that question might be valid, but it's not important. So I'll pick on SDVoE. You know, they come in and say, "What's your latency?" And you say practically zero. And they say, "Perfect, that's what we want." But if you said, "What are you trying to do?" They say, "Oh, we're trying to send this to a campus 1,000 miles away." You
Mm-hmm.
go, "This might not be the right technology for you."
Sure.
Because quite frankly, if those people aren't in the same room, um, zero latency doesn't matter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if they're not interacting, it doesn't matter if that latency is 10 seconds. At my house, um, my TV in my bedroom is 4 seconds behind my TV in my living room because that's where the DVR is, and so everything loops through the DVR, and that does not affect my life at all. That if I'm in the bedroom, I happen to see the football game 4 seconds later. It doesn't really matter. The only time I would ever notice is if I'm quickly walking from one room to another and they're both on the same channel. So when they're asking the wrong question, it might be that they're completely asking the wrong question, or they're not asking the most important question. And this really comes back to needs analysis.
Tell us what you mean by that. And I'm
Okay.
thinking this might even
So
tie
under
into that
either,
news piece we read.
yeah. So under any of those things, and he makes good points. Um, but one of the things he didn't do in that article was say, why do you have all of these things on separate boards and pieces of software? Because that may introduce a constraint saying, well, those things exist on four different networks of four different classifications, and they can't all be on the same network at the same time. So I can't have an automated means to do those overlays. Or,
Mm,
but then you could look and go out. So you have to figure out what they're trying to do. Ideally, I like measurable goals because I like statements of work that guarantee it I get paid. Um, and you've got to consider the stakeholders and most importantly the environment that it's going in. So that whole thing about we want to send video to a campus across the country, that's an environmental factor. You have to coexist with a network that's going thousands of miles. What's appropriate for it? And then you're looking at constraints, and constraints can be good or bad. The system must do this or the system must not do this, and
mhm,
and you look at all of those things and figure it out. And one of the problems people have in when they do constraints is they might set a minimal value saying it's got to be better than this, but they don't set a maximum value at which point that stops being a weighted measurement. So if I was going to use the latency and going across country and it was, two-way communications, I would set that latency constraint at 50, 100 milliseconds one way, because at that point people can still talk and not have so
mhm.
much talking over each other. But once I get below 50 milliseconds, I'm not going to give any extra points for being below that. I'm going to look at the next most important thing on my list and work on that. If I beat that, that's fine. It just doesn't get extra points for being better than good enough.
Right. It's no longer improving the experience at that point.
Right. On the other hand, if they say we have a professor and they want to be able to interact directly with the screen using their PC and mouse, that required latency number
Hmm.
moves way lower because a 50 millisecond latency will drive them crazy. That's why TVs have game mode. Um, they should be on for everything in Pro AV, but the game people got really mad when they dropped $4,000 on a new 85-inch TV set, and their first person shooter scores went down, and it was because they were having that monitor lag that was
Yeah.
happening because modern monitors often add 100 to 200 milliseconds of delay in making your video perfect. Just trying to
Right.
see where my air quotes fit on my camera shot.
Let's see. I can't reach all the way. Oh well.
Okay.
Um, you started to touch on this. I want to talk about product specs a little bit, right? You mentioned
Yeah.
SDVoE zero latency, of course, and you know what? As you said, there are applications where that's truly important, and there's many applications where a little more latency would be okay. Of course, SDVoE will sell on our other benefits like interoperability and multi viewers and things like that in those cases.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
what are the ways that product specs can help, and what are the ways that product specs might hurt in this conversation with an end customer who's just trying to get their problem solved?
Well, it would be nice, first of all, if they were accurate. I would love to
Yes.
see
Okay.
accurate spec sheets, as well as looking at. It's very often hard to find out things that are important that go in constraints. So, for instance, I was working with a video encoder that was just for IPTV, just a H.264 encoder, and it could send out streams unicast or multicast. And my question was, well, how many unicast streams can go out before it starts to break down? Obviously, there's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
limit, I need a stream for each one. It's a device. It's probably not network speed. What's that limit? And they're like, well, what do you need it to be? I'm like, it doesn't, it's more important to know what the number is than what the
Yeah.
number actually is, because I just need to know at what threshold I have to go to a different technique. So if it's only ever going
Hmm.
to go to 2 displays, I'm going to opt for unicast because I don't have to worry about the network. It's easier. But
Sure.
but if it needs to go to 20, I'm obviously going to go to multicast because I'm sure that little cheap, inexpensive encoder is not going to be able to support 20 simultaneous unicast displays. And it's also important to think about that ahead of time as a potential, because in this particular case, the sports car world, they're not going to notice that that doesn't work until the Super Bowl, because they're never going to have it on more than 3 screens at a time until the Super Bowl, when
Yeah.
suddenly 40 screens are on it and nothing works, and you get those calls. So getting back to those specs and the customers and the previous question is really coming back to, what are you trying to do? What kind of constraints do you potentially have? And then you explain to them why what they want isn't actually going to work.
Hmm.
And hopefully they're rational. And I'm not a big believer in the customer is always right. I'd go further in saying the customer is rarely right. And that's why they hire people to explain things to them, and to do this due diligence. But but it gets really easy to fall under the marketing FUD, or where a single metric is pushed. And I pick on the zero latency because it's one of the most misunderstood things in network distribution. In
Sure.
85% of the cases, it's not the most important constraint. I would put interoperability and multiple transports and that sort of thing way above latency in most installations. But the latency
Yeah.
number becomes easy for somebody who
It's
doesn't
easy.
think deeply to compare two things and get a number. And at a previous employer, one of your previous employer kicked my butt with the simple concept of four is more than two, whereas my nuanced argument of you don't
Visual
need
acuity.
four,
We don't need that many pixels. You're sitting too far from the display. 4 is better than 2.
right?